Hi, my name is Jeff Breeden. I'm a senior police officer with the Houston Police Department Robbery Division. I currently have 23 years on with the police department, and the last 12 or so I've been with the Robbery Division, and I'm here today to share with y'all some crime prevention tips, and so let's get started. So in order to start the class, I always kind of like to lighten up the mood a little bit. I think we've all at one time or another shared an experience in selling something or buying something from an online ad, and there's always that uneasiness because of the fact that you're meeting somebody and you're about to exchange money with property, and the biggest mystery is that we don't always know the person on the other end. So I'd like to just start off by sharing this video.
You Tim?
You Julian?
You got the stuff?
You got the money?
Of course I got the money.
Who's this?
Don't worry about him.
Yeah, don't worry about me.
I thought I told you to come alone.
This isn't my first rodeo, pal. No one ever comes alone.
Fair enough.
Whoa, 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 whoa. Relax. We're cool, right? We're cool.
Yeah, we're cool.
Show me the iPad. Can you do 200?
It's not negotiable. In the post I said 250.
Okay, no worries.
Show me the cash.
I'm gonna reach in my pocket. Where's the money?
Slowly.
Let go.
On 3. 1, 2, 3. It's all there.
Looks good.
Yeah, I reset it to factory settings for you.
Oh man, thank you so much.
My pleasure, man. My mom got me a new one for Christmas, so I don't need two.
Yeah, I just lost mine, so I'm very happy I got a new
For
one.
sure. Stand down. Yeah, we're good. No, abort.
Roger that.
Don't worry about it. Hey, what was your name again? Julian?
Tim?
Yeah.
Tim?
Hey, sorry.
Hey, Marco,
Ah,
yeah, I'm
thanks.
so glad we didn't do this, man. I didn't want to f*** it up as my dad.
Oh, you want to hurt me? I don't like violence.
Me neither. We don't know how to fight.
All right, God bless.
God bless you.
See ya.
You're so nice.
So nice, man.
Damn, man.
Dude,
Look
so
at that.
excited.
I know, it's so dope.
Awesome. Cool.
So I guess it's safe to say that there's always that sense of uneasiness. So let's go ahead and get started. We have different types of robberies that happen in Houston. Robberies that happen regularly, and there's 3 that I'm going to go over today. And starting with those robbery trends, one of them is what we consider a jugger. The term actually started in Houston from what I've been told, and I don't know how that came about that this term started here and why it as a jugger, but basically I'll go over the term with you, and then I'm going to show you some videos, and we're going to talk about prevention tips after the fact. So the term is used to describe suspects who sit in bank parking lots or financial institutions and watch customers go in and out of a bank. Suspects follow the customers that they believe are in possession of cash and look for an opportunity to burglarize their vehicle or rob them directly. In the robbery division, the one thing that stands out about these suspects that is always concerning to us is that these juggers are not afraid to come into contact with individuals. So it makes them a little bit more dangerous because they'll follow a victim to a parking lot, and if they feel like that victim is actually coming out of their vehicle with the money in hand, they'll do whatever is necessary in order to try to get that money from them. So we do have some cases where they just burglarize the vehicle and take the money from that. But the dangerous thing about these suspects is that they're actually patient. Traditionally, a lot of our jugging suspects are older males. They're a little bit more seasoned and a little bit more familiar with the robberies, and that's what makes them a little bit more dangerous. A lot of times they've been in prison before, and so they're just familiar with this process. So here we have a vehicle that's just pulled in, and now the suspects are in that black vehicle right there. And as you can see, here comes the victim, and he just gets hit right in the face as the suspects are taking his money, and then they just do whatever's necessary. A lot of times they're armed, and in this case, I don't think they displayed a weapon. It just happens that fast. As you can see, when he came out of the vehicle, initially he was looking down, wasn't really looking around his surroundings. The thing that I mentioned earlier on about bank jugging suspects is that they will sit in parking lots at financial institutions, and then what they do is they'll follow you. And it doesn't matter to them where they're following you to. It doesn't matter if you're driving to the house, to work, whatever it is. And in this case, this guy was returning back to work. But the other thing that they do also is they also sit in parking lots at businesses where they'll also try to follow owners' habits and when they're coming out of their store and when they're leaving, and they try to get an idea as to when they're making bank runs. That's one interesting thing about bank juggers than anything, because they're just patient, and that's a lot of the robbery suspects that we have in Houston are not patient. They're just looking for a quick fix. But these guys are not in that case. They're patient enough to wait for their victims. And here we have another one. Like I said, these are just two small examples of the many videos that we have in cases where we have bank jugging suspects. One thing that you've seen in the last two is that these suspects are not afraid to be hands-on when it comes to getting that money from that victim. So, the best thing to do is, if you fall as a victim in a case like this, is just to give up the property. Because once they get the property, then they're good to go. They're ready to go. And then I'll go over tips and stuff like that as to what to do after the event happens if someone were to fall victim. There's several things to be aware of in jugging prevention, and things to be aware of when you're banking. Occupied vehicles backed into parking spaces with a clear view of the front door of a bank, ATM, or commercial drive-through. And that's what they'll do. The thing is sometimes they'll sit in parking lots of the actual bank, but a lot of the times they'll sit in adjacent parking lots where they have a clear view into the bank parking lot, and so they're not as easily seen. But one thing that we do see pretty common with these type of suspects is that the vehicles that they're in have very dark window tints. So it's always important just to be vigilant, and when you're exiting your vehicle, if you're going to walk into a bank and you're about to exit with some money, just take a second to stand and pay attention to what's around you. If you see the same vehicle still sitting there with people sitting in it, then that's definitely something to pay attention to when you're coming out. Vehicles arriving at the bank with no occupants entering the bank is always a clue as to something to pay attention to. Vehicles changing parking spaces. So if they're sitting there too long, obviously they're going to move because they don't want to get themselves noticed. So that's one thing that we'll see as a trend with these type of suspects. Like I said before, vehicles with tinted windows with little or no visibility of the occupants inside. So it requires just paying a little bit more attention to these vehicles in order to tell if there's somebody actually in it. Now, you never want to walk up to the vehicle itself, but best you can try to see if there's somebody that's occupying that vehicle. The other most important thing is that I really can't recall at any time where I've seen a case happen where a jugging suspect was by himself. So there's probably going to always be at least two. At least in the 13 years or so that I've been in the robbery division, I can't ever recall a case where we had just one suspect that was caught in the vehicle. So always pay attention to a vehicle that's occupied with several people, that's sitting by itself in a parking lot. And how can you protect yourself? So like I said, and I can't say it enough, just always be aware of your surroundings and always know what's around you. And by all means, if you feel like something isn't right about a certain vehicle, now I would never walk right up to the vehicle and take a picture of it, but maybe discreetly from your phone, pretend like you're making a phone call and perhaps take a picture of that phone from a distance, maybe being able to catch a license plate or something to that effect. Conceal money before leaving the bank. So never openly carry a bank bag, an envelope, or coin box as you're exiting. That is a very, very big clue that these suspects are looking for. So you almost want to make it look exactly as you came in as you come out, meaning that you're not carrying any type of bag that makes it seem like you may be walking out with money after leaving the bank. And then be aware of anyone following you after you leave the bank. And now this is a big one because of the fact that a lot of these suspects, this is when it starts for them. This is what they're waiting on. They're waiting on their victim sometimes they have no idea who they're waiting on. They're just waiting on somebody who they believe is going to be walking out carrying that money, and then that's the person that they're going to be following out. So it's always important to be aware and cognizant of that fact. If you suspect that you're being targeted, call 911 from your cell phone and keep the dispatcher informed of your location. If you make a few turns and you feel like they're making the same turn, and then you make some odd turns and they're making the same turns, then you need to get on your phone and call 911 and make them aware that you believe that suspects are following you. You could potentially fall victim of being a jugging victim in this case. I can't emphasize this enough. It's always important just to be aware that if you leave a parking lot and you feel like there's a vehicle following you, and let's say you make a left turn and then make a right turn, just to kind of confirm your feelings, by all means get on your phone, dial 911 and let that dispatcher know, and by no means stop that vehicle other than at stop signs and red lights and so forth until you get to a police station. There's nothing wrong with being overly cautious, then especially if you're being targeted. And when you're leaving your vehicle and you have a bank envelope, you want to try to hide it somewhere within your body or so forth, and you don't want to just leave it sitting, say, on your passenger seat. So if you get out to run into a convenience store, and this has happened in so many different cases where somebody may just run into a convenience store, but they don't want to take that large amount of money with them, so they'll just leave it on their seat, and then they'll get out, and then the other form of jugging, where it comes to be where they burglarize your vehicle, then falls into place, break your window, and then they'll take that money as quickly as possible and go from there. The second type of robbery trend I want to go over is what we consider sliders. Sliders will a lot of times target gas stations and grocery stores. And sliders are suspects that pull up near their target vehicle and then they seek purses and wallets. So this is another trend that we have issues with, and a lot of times the suspects will target females by themselves. And let me show you some videos to give you an example. So as you see, and just like jugging suspects, these people don't really know who they're going to be targeting when they get there, but they know what they're targeting. So here is a case, and the one thing that I'll see is they'll make themselves look obvious because they'll slow down and just stand out. So here they stop, and the female is in the driver's side. So what this male's going to do is basically slide into a position where he can open that passenger door, as he is in this white vehicle that you can't see too well, and then he just takes off that fast. Her door is unlocked, and she's not suspecting anything like this to happen. He just exits that back passenger door, basically kind of like slides over to the her vehicle, opens the door, takes her purse, and then it just happens in a matter of seconds. We'll give you another example. And same thing, here we are, the suspect opens the door and then looks for an opportunity, opens her passenger door, grabs her purse, and this all happens in a matter of just seconds. So it's always important that when you get in your vehicle, obviously to lock that door. And as soon as you get in that vehicle, to lock that door in order to not give them the opportunity. I'll go over the sliding prevention tips, but to run along with that, the other type of issue that we have as in robbery trends in Houston are public parking lot robberies. And this is just a criminal that often seek female or elderly victims in parking lots and tend to seek women who are not paying attention to their surroundings. So in a lot of videos that we'll get in the robbery division, and when we are reviewing those videos, these males will just drive around in a parking lot, and they'll just wait for somebody who they don't think is paying attention to their surroundings and to what they're doing, and then they'll basically lock in on that person and wait for an opportunity to rob them. So I'll give you a couple of examples. In these cases, a lot like the jugging suspects, is a lot of times they have help. They won't be by themselves because they need a driver, and then they need somebody who's going to be able to quickly grab that purse. In this case, it's a little different in the sense that there's two occupants, but the driver sees an opportunity to pull up beside the victim And as she's just walking with her purse side away from the vehicles in the parking lot, that's when he's able to just to roll down the window, grab her purse, and then take off from there. And a lot of what we see in cases like this is a panic from the victims, but obviously because they don't have their card information and so forth. So a lot of times what the suspects will do is they'll immediately go somewhere and use that card as quickly as they can before it gets canceled. And here, let's go over another one. So in a case like this one, it's very obvious that the suspects don't really care about harming somebody else, as in this case. Just a lot of times, and I say a lot because I've seen so many cases where these suspects will come up behind their victims, females, and then grab their purses. And it's a natural instinct for a female to just hold on to her purse, not knowing what type of harm is behind them, just because of, they're not wanting to give up their purse. So as in the case with her, once you realize that she was in danger, because this happens so quickly, this just happens in a matter of seconds, that it's at that time that she lets go of her purse. But these suspects don't necessarily care. We've had numerous victims that were dragged along a vehicle while they're holding onto the purse, not wanting to let go of it. So, and let's go over one more here. And this is how bold these guys are. Look, as you see, he's pulling out of this space here. Just pulls up next to this female, broad daylight. Just walks over to her vehicle. She sees what's going on, and then it just happens that fast. She falls and takes off, and obviously they've paid attention to her and seeing that she laid her purse in the vehicle, and then at that point, he's taking off and she gets bruised and so forth as she's trying to get her purse back, rightfully so. That's her natural instinct, but it's just, unfortunately, this is not what we recommend because it's property and it's not worth getting hurt over. In a case like this, well, what would we recommend? Well, it's hard to completely bulletproof every incident and keep anything from happening. But in a case like this, one thing that I might recommend is once you put her purse in the vehicle, and I get it that it's a pain to have to think about this every time you go to the store, but if you feel like something's not right, then perhaps locking the vehicle with your remote key and then going to put your groceries up. And so that at least that way somebody can't just get into the vehicle, put that key in your pocket or so forth. Because all these crimes happen very quickly, but these suspects are different from jugging suspects in the sense that they're not patient. They don't want witnesses. So they want to get out of there, in and out as quickly as possible. So if they see that they're not going to be able to get into that vehicle as quickly as they like, they're going to probably take off. The last two trends that I've talked about, sliding and parking lot robbery prevention. One thing to always do is lock your doors. If you've put your groceries up, now you're sitting in your vehicle, I would recommend that you go ahead and just lock your doors. And if you've got business to take care of in the parking lot where you're just going to sit there for a few minutes, make sure that somebody can't easily access your vehicle. So let's say you're sitting in your vehicle and then at that point you see somebody trying to get into it. One thing that criminals, and this goes on the third point that you see in the slide, is that you honk your horn. Because the one thing that criminals don't like is they don't like attention being turned towards them. So if you were to sit on your horn as they're trying to get in your vehicle, they're not going to want to be there any longer than they have to. So they're going to do everything they can to try to get out of there as quickly as possible. So, paying attention to what is happening around you falls in line with all that as well. Resist fighting back and be a good witness. And then park near people and lighting. One of the things that has helped us and helped myself in all my years of working robbery cases is victims that pay very close attention to their suspects. And what I mean by that is the last thing you want to do is fight back. But the one thing that you can do, as long as the criminal doesn't give you an order not to look at them, is to pay attention to things like tattoos, scars, piercings, anything that will stand out that will help us. In the police department, our gang officers track individuals with tattoos and if they're confirmed gang members and so forth. And so we have a database where we keep up with criminals that have specific identifiers that will help us in case they're a suspect in a future case. So if somebody has, say, a tattoo on their right forearm and it's a number or it's something that stands out, pay attention to things like that and relay that information back to the patrol officer or the robbery detective so they're able to take note of that and we're able to look at it in the crime analysis part of it in order to help solve that crime. The other important thing is if you do fall victim of a robbery, as a robbery victim, being able to identify that person later is going to become very important, because the fact that in order for us to be able to make our case, a lot of times we have to have a good identification on that suspect in order to get a good charge from the district attorney's office. These suspects are felons, so we want to do everything that we can on our end in order to put these felons in jail. This is not small stuff as far as the kind of crimes they're committing. Anything dealing with a robbery is considered a felony, so it's punishable by it's not a misdemeanor. It's a big crime to commit a robbery. So we want to do everything we can as detectives in order to put these people in jail. So if you can, try to get a look at their face, look at their eyes, look at anything that if you see them again, it will just stand out to you in saying that you're going to be able to recognize them if you were to see them again. And then park near people and lighting, because that's the other thing too, is these suspects will target areas that aren't very lit and where there may not be a lot of people, because the last thing they want is somebody to help you out being nearby. So they'd rather a lot of people be by themselves. So how can you help us? Well, like I said a minute ago, being a good witness. Don't try to be a hero and take no action that would jeopardize your own safety. Follow the robber's directions, but do not volunteer more than what he asked for. Advise the robber of any unusual moves you must make. Assure him you will cooperate. And this goes along with what I was saying just a second ago in making your mental notes. This is the most important part to the detective in helping him solve your robbery cases. Make mental notes of the robber's race, his age, his height, sex, clothing description, complexion, color of hair, his eyes, etc. Note anything unusual about the robber, such as scars and tattoos. Anything that will help us out. And then also note the number of accomplices and how they left the premises, their direction of travel, the type and color of their vehicle, and then the license plate. Note the type, size, and color of their weapon, and watch where the robber puts his or her hands, or whether or not he or she touches anything, because fingerprints might be left behind. And by all means, if you're a victim and you know that suspect put his hand somewhere and did not wear gloves, when that patrol officer comes to the scene, tell them that you would like fingerprints taken. A lot of times, it may not be a lot going on, and it's not necessarily a bad thing just to ask the officer if they wouldn't mind taking prints, because everybody has a print kit as well, because that will be a big factor as far as us being able to identify that person if in fact there was a fingerprint left at the scene. The other important thing to pay attention to as far as taking mental notes is the suspect left-handed or is the suspect right-handed? Paying attention to certain things like that is also important. So over time in the robbery division, we haven't always had these, but now we've since gone to social media where all of our unsolved robberies, and sometimes are solved because we'll keep them on there as well, we'll share on different social media platforms. So you can go to YouTube and type Houston Police Robbery and follow us on YouTube, and then on Facebook we're at Houston Police Robbery, on Twitter at HPD Robbery. We have our own website, HoustonPoliceRobbery.org, and then we're also on Nextdoor. And like I said a short while ago, one of the things that we deal with specifically are felons. And with that being said, Crime Stoppers has been on board with us as far as them stamping their disclaimer on every case that we put out. The reason why that's important is because Crime Stoppers pays up to $5,000 for information leading to the charging and or arrest of a suspect in the case. And being that that's the case, we get many Crime Stoppers tips because whenever somebody calls in a suspect information, their information is never asked from Crime Stoppers. They give them a number and they have a way to getting that person paid where you never have to provide your information. So it's always remaining completely anonymous. And thank you so much for your attention today. If anybody has any questions, just feel free to contact me directly. You can contact me at Jeffrey, JEFFERY.Breeden, BRIEDEN, at HoustonPolice.org, or you can contact me by phone at 713-308-0776. I know it was a lot of information I just threw at you in a short period of time. And one of the biggest things that I would emphasize is being a good witness. And now that you're aware of these kind of cases too, it should be able to help you as far as preventing yourself from ever becoming a robbery victim yourself.